Welcome to this presentation. Uh, this is a small intro into creating real-time hair for like video games. Just to note that I won't be going into major detail when it comes to 3D modeling and all that sort of stuff. It's mainly going to be producing textures, the tools I use, and some Unreal Engine info. So yeah, that's that. So who am I? That's me, that's my face. My name is Chris Wright. I'm a groom artist in the industry. I've had about 5 years of experience, and I've worked through many various companies via outsourcing, direct working, and freelance. I've worked for Airship, which is a crazy hair outsourcing company, Gate 21, THQ Nordic, all that. Some of the games I've worked on include Gotham Knights, Alan Wake Remastered, Alone in the Dark, tons of just random projects that never never got off, but yeah, that's that. I'll be going through basically all the stages of making hair. We're going to be talking about volumes, textures, caps, the different layers, LODs, just Unreal Engine setup sort of thing. So we'll start off with the volume. The volume is basically a simple mesh that you create as a reference piece before you even start thinking about cards, before textures. It's usually done sculpted, and this can contain tons of info, or it can just be simple shapes. It's basically down to personal preference, because at the end of the day, it'll be the asset that you're looking at alone, basically. In the industry, the volume has to be a little bit more detailed. For example, when you start a new asset with a client, they'll want to see what the hair looks like before you started. And it would suck if you started placing cards and they went, nah, get rid of that, we want something else. So it's basically a placeholder. And here is an example of the hair that I'll be demoing. This is the volume I made in ZBrush. You can see that it really isn't detailed, and even the top section, it's just blobs. But a basic flow, basic hairline detail. It's all you really need. Texture-wise, there are 7 main textures you need for hair. You only really need 6 of them, so I'll go through each one individually, but you need the albedo, the alpha, the normal, the flow, the ID, depth, and the root. And these are some examples. So the albedo is basically all the color information. That's pretty much it. If you noticed, the strands look really, really thick. This is actually not the full strand. So there's a technique called edge padding, where it will basically give every strand just a little bit more texture. It's hard to explain. And it basically stops black color from slightly bleeding into the texture when it's rendered in 3D. So it's kind of like a safety net sort of thing. The normal map basically has all the 3D detail for each strand. So using this in a renderer, it would make all the strands look like individual tubes, and light will portray that sort of thing. This map isn't necessary for Unreal Engine. The shader that I'm going to show off doesn't actually use it. So the ID map is basically every strand you place has a unique shade of white to black, and this helps the engine basically differentiate every strand, and it helps with clipping. When two cards clip, it blends the strands together, so it doesn't just look like a solid slice. So this is probably a better view actually of edge padding. You can kind of see these strands are isolated in like a padding. So yeah, that's that. The flow map. This one is a little tricky to understand. I never got it the first time, but it basically calculates and helps the engine to determine how the light flows through the hair. So this GIF from Marmoset shows off that, but the one on the left has no flow map. And you can kind of see the light just kind of goes up and down. Doesn't know where the beginning and end of the strands are, but when it's added, the light curves. So it's the same light movement, but it recognizes that it bends. The height map or depth map, it's basically when you make cards with strands or curves, it's in a 3D space. So you'll always have cards in like coming out from the front, some right at the back, and this depth information is basically captured. So further back the strands are, the darker it is. The closer to the camera it is, the lighter it is. And this also helps similarly to the ID map. It just helps with depth, gives it a better visual look. The root map is, so it takes every strand, no matter the height, no matter how long it is or whatever, and it runs a gradient through it. So the root would be black, the tips would be white, and you get this clean transition. This map is probably best used with the dye, hair dye kind of effect, because the roots of the hair will obviously not have like complete hair dye unless it's just been recently dyed. So it acts as a mask. And the alpha map is probably the most important mask or map. It is a mask, so anything that's black is transparent, anything that's white is opaque. Okay, and this is just another list of all the maps you need. Normal map, not so much. Now, one of the problems I had when I started was how do you make these textures? So a lot of information online always tend to go for Maya and Arnold rendering. And I was always really terrible at just trying to get my head around this. To this day, I still really don't know how to do proper Arnold rendering with these textures. It's so confusing. So instead, I use a third-party software called Photoshop to create these textures. And this is a standard in the industry at this point. The Photoshop is a texture making software. It's super easy to use, very common in the industry. Like I've had a recent job and they use it. Everyone uses it. It's got a simple texture editor. within. So when you've baked the textures in the software, you can then manipulate them like you would in Photoshop within the software. And you also get a live view in real time, so you can edit, you can place curves, do whatever, and they just appear without having to wait for any rendering. So now that I've got the tools and textures out of the way, when I begin and I have a volume, I take the reference that I create the volume from, and I put it into a PureRef board, which is a board where you can basically put a big, it's like a collage. You can just make a huge collage of references and full high quality pictures. You can just throw them in, and you can be able to look at them, no problem. I take the best examples that I've got, and I basically do a paint over in Photoshop or even Paint. And it just helps me to understand what textures need to be made. And I've got an example here. So this is a wedding hair. Wedding hair is always crazy. It's always got crazy curls, lots of depth, different tones of hair. So it's always a good start to go with. As you can see, I basically painted over all the key parts. What I'd like to do, get some of those flyaways in, and then you just get a big mess of color and lines. But you can take this and basically make textures from this. So yeah, that's how that works. The cap. This bit is sometimes a bit confusing. I'll try and make it as clear as possible. So the cap is basically a duplicated section of the head, just the scalp area. It's given its own UVs, so it's flat, like you can see here in the texture. And it's basically used as a underlayer to cover up any gaps that you might have missed. And it also really helps with fine hairs in the texture, like the hairline, all the fine details. You can actually also make this in Photoshop as well. I always say that a cap, it kind of works like this. So this is basically hair powder. I don't know what it's called, but it's just a powder that goes over your head, covers up any bald spots. It doesn't add any hair or do anything, but it makes it look way fuller than it actually is. And it's kind of a similar situation with this. I'll quickly go into the different tiers of cards. So when you're making textures, you want to have a variety of densities. I think that's the term. So I call them tiers. There's 5 different tiers I've got in this texture set. So the first tier is the filler card. This basically shouldn't have any gaps. I've got a couple of gaps here, but this basically acts as the anchor point for all the clumps. If you didn't have this, your hair would probably look very transparent and kind of weak. If that makes sense. Like you're losing hair basically. Like your hair, you could see straight through the hair. But with this, it kind of backs it up, fills it in, no gaps. Tier 2 is these kind of cards. So it's very similar to Tier 1, but it's got gaps in it, basically. These go on top of the Tier 1s, quite close, and these just break up the repeating kind of layer 1s. If you look at layer 1 in Engine, so I'll show you layer 1 in Engine when I get to it, it is very flat. Even with all the textures, even with all the depth maps and everything, it's very flat and it's very visually noticeable, especially when light bounces off it. Throwing one of these on top of it completely fixes that, and it just hides it. Tier 3, these cards add depth. So these green cards here, you can So you've got tier 1, you've got tier 2. Tier 3 goes on top of tier 2, but at a further distance. I hope that makes sense. So you can have, so tier 3 cards basically sit on top of this clump, and you can have like up to 3 or 4 of them on one clump, and it just gives it depth. It helps with the light bouncing off the strands. Tier 4 are the flyaway cards. So these are probably my favorite cards, straight up. These break up the silhouette of the hair. So when you've created a hair and you've got to tier 3, you'll notice that your hair looks very cardy and very flat. And so when you throw these into the hair, it just adds noise. It's hard to explain, really. I'll throw the engine on so you can kind of see. This is the hair. So this is layer 1, right? You can kind of see it's not looking great, but it does its purpose. You can look at it from this side, you can look from that side, and there's no major gaps. The fill layer is the tier 2 and 3, so kind of see like this card. It's all just a mess of cards at different angles. So some are kind of going in at an angle. This one's going in at an angle. It's all over the place. And then the flyaways, this one. The flyaways are basically just flat cards, kind of go on top. Is there a geometry view? Okay, oh god. Let me see. Okay, there isn't. Okay. If you just picture it like a mohawk, how the hair kind of goes straight up and back, all these cards, all these strands, flyaways, kind of work in the same way. So you can kind of see here, for example, this is a card that is going in sideways and sticks out. You can kind of see. It's really difficult to explain. This is the problem. But yeah, that's basically the different tiers. The final tier is hairline cards. So these cards, basically these yellow cards, blend the hair to the head with a smooth transition that you couldn't get with the very large cards. So again, with this, you kind of see these just cover up any kind of inconsistencies. Like there's an error there, but they kind of cover those up. So now that that's out the way, I will go to Photoshop and I'll try and do a little demo on how to make cards. Oh. Okay, so this is Photoshop. This is probably the best tool I've ever used in my life. So it starts off like this. You have a 2D view and a 3D view. So this is the 3D view. You can kind of see it's in a 3D space. And this is the 2D render version. You can view all the maps here. So this is the ID, this is the alpha, the height, everything you need. I usually work on alpha at the beginning. And it is basically just get up and go. So if I wanted to make a flyaway or a tier 3, I like to hand draw things. So I press the hand draw, click draw, strands. Let's say I want to draw 6. I just Just kind of draw. There we go. Like that. And then you can mess with all the modifiers. So this is kind of a modifier workflow. So this is looking good. It's looking a bit low poly. So I'll just quickly up the segments, makes it look smooth. Change the thickness. I usually go with this sort of curve. Get a noise in there. Shift it, randomness. There we go. That's one card done. I mean, I would add some additional strands, so let's just kind of like that. So yeah, and I mean that isn't far off of this. So the bun that I showed you in Unreal Engine, this is the texture for it. It's very simple. There's nothing really to it. And the best part of it is, now that we've got a texture, for example, we go to bake, set it to a 4K resolution, done. Just done. And in Maya, it would take 5 minutes to render, but it's finished. And so you can see it's got all the maps you need. Alpha, the normal, don't use it, but yeah, the normal. Depth. And if you didn't want the edge padding on, I can actually turn that off. Make it look a bit cleaner. Yeah, we rebake it. There we go. So yeah, very nice. This bit is the texture editing. So this is really great. What you can do is you can take all the maps you've created, so all of these, and you can kind of mash them together. So let's say we wanted to give this some variation in tone. Press add filter, go to ID. Yeah, let's go to ID. And it basically adds it on top. You can set it to multiply, and it will just give you that extra variation. You can go absolutely crazy with the color. So we wanted more of a dark roots, light tips. Do the same sort of thing. You can kind of go through all sorts of things. Let's go with multiply. Lower the opacity a bit. And you can even just add like another one and invert it completely if you really want to. Okay, that's crazy. Yeah, and you do this for every map. It's not really necessary for the other maps, but the diffuse, you want to get it right, you want to make it look nice. And then it's just as easy as exporting it. So yeah, there are a couple of things I tend to avoid. Some things I do, some things I don't. So the do's and don'ts of creating textures. When I see people make textures, there's always quite a lot of wasted space. Take this texture, for example. This is obviously I've done the sin of having a big black kind of block here, but you can see how I've kind of used up as much space as I possibly can. Like I could even get a card here sideways if I wanted to, if I was really running out of space. So you want to use up as much space as possible. Like there is not really a gap here. There aren't really gaps. And you can just go crazy, fit in whatever you want. You don't need to follow a grid. You don't need to do anything. Because at the end of the day, you're setting up UVs, which kind of just put UVs wherever you want. So yeah, the only thing I would say is I tend not to scale up cards. So if I'm making tiny peach fuzz, for example, on the same texture as a mustache, this hair is going to be way, way bigger than the peach fuzz. But if you scale the peach fuzz up, it will become extremely thin, if that makes sense. So you want it to basically, you want this, you want the thickness to match the scale of what it is. Hard to explain. It's really hard to explain. The one thing that I see quite a lot of is horizontal strands in cards. So I have an example of this, but let's say you're making long or curly hair, you're gonna be stretching the cards. So having horizontal strands will mess up the thickness. So here's an example. This is a card, this is basically a flyaway-esque tier 3, and it's got this big flyaway going through the middle of it. And this is a close-up. And it looks fine from here. If you weren't going to stretch this, then it's perfectly fine. Short hair, you can usually get away with this. But if you can see, if you stretch it, everything else looks fine. But then this horizontal hair gets extremely thick, and that will light up in engine. That is very obvious. So try and avoid that. I think the best angle you could probably get is about a 45-degree angle. Anything over that, you're going to end up with this. Another mistake that I see is parallel lines. So people make hair and they throw on flyaways and they do all that, but their textures are basically just parallel lines or train tracks. So here's an example of my very old hair. Ooh. You can see this section alone, every card, every hair is basically following the exact same thing. Same here. No, it isn't impossible to come across this in real life, but seeing it more than once it shows it's very obvious. I think another thing that I haven't actually mentioned in the presentation is if you can see these cards up top, you've got hairs coming down. I hope you can see my mouse, otherwise this was pointless. But you can see the flow of the hair. It's kind of going down the head, but then you've got other cards just flying off in some random direction. You really need the hair to kind of flow correctly. Even if it is like a wild hairstyle, there's still kind of control and flow in this sort of thing. Card placement. So this is quite a quick one because if I was to do a demo in Maya, it would probably take 3 hours. So I was just gonna get it in presentation form, basically explain what tools I use. So this is GS Curve Tools. It's an extremely cheap tool. It's ideal to use when making cards, when making hair with cards. Basically what it does is it creates a card with a spline through it. And instead of having to control every single vertice of the card, so every single point in the card, you can just control a basic curve with like 3 points on it, 4, 5, as many as you want. You get lots of twist modifiers, you can just do anything. And it's never permanent, so you can always untwist it if you need to, go in the future. This tool is pretty well known in the industry. I use it non-stop because a lot of companies and game developers, they don't have their own tools because that's quite expensive. So this is very quick and easy, just a simple plugin that gives everything you need, and it's always being updated. It's also great because, like I said, it's non-destructive. So if an artist needed to take over from you, for example, you can just give them the Maya file and they can just make changes without having to mess with it, sort of thing. I kind of explained this already, but I'll do another. I'll do this. So we start off with the base layer, representing key clumps. This represents the flow of the hair, and it fills in any gaps for the later cards. And for example of what this actually does, if I remove this initial layer, you can kind of see through the hair like this. And this isn't great. So you want to pop that on. It's a lifesaver basically. Ooh. The main layer, like I said, it's tier 2s and tier 3s. Basically, this is where most of the work is. So, for example, if you see in your reference piece, oh, there's a hair there's two clumps that come into each other and then they come out, and or for example, back here, you can kind of see this clump does this, and there's another one going this way, and there's a gap in between. You have full control when you come to this layer. You can kind of ignore the previous layer because you can break these up with these cards. I hope that makes sense. Uh, yeah, yeah. The flyaways, like I said, just best. It's so fun adding these because you can just go crazy. Basically, it gives it the detail that clients always want. You throw on flyaways that they're impressed. So yeah. um, yeah, Unreal Engine, right. This is where it gets complicated. So I'm gonna basically go through the material and maybe do like a lighting kind of guide tutorial thing, I don't know. So the material itself is it it's the MetaHumans material, but it's previous generation. So I'm using Unreal Engine 4. The reason I'm using Unreal Engine 4 is because I think it's best to always learn with Unreal Engine 4 because Unreal Engine 5 has a lot of crutches, like throwing on Lumen and ray tracing, and it's really easy. Whereas with this, you have to really have fine control and understand just the engine. So that's why I use the digital human. This is free. This is basically Epic Games character reference. It has this character in it. I use this project as the main project, so this is part of this project. I just made a new level. This is the location of the material, so it's in content, bust, materials, and then this is the name. This is what it looks like. So if I show you, for example, this is the hair. This is the material. So it will start off with everything kind of locked up like this. Just get rid of that. So it'll look like this. What you do is you just pop your textures in. So once you've rendered them in Photoshop, you just drag them in. Alpha goes here, depth, diffuse. The diffuse is the albedo. two different names, same thing. The flow map. Sometimes the flow map doesn't actually show up on the material until you use flow map texture. So turn that on, plug the flow map in. Here's the root, and the unique hair value is the ID. And you'll also want to turn on diffuse base and flow map. Yeah, these two. This allows you to use the color map. And you're basically halfway there. Like, the material is set up at this point. So these settings, you can just do whatever with them. You know, brightness, turn up the brightness. Edge mask contrast. This kinda this is the, oh god. Just okay, so edge mask minimum. So this basically reduces how it looks from a different angle. So if you look at a card side on, so it just looks like a thin strip, the edge mask will hide it basically. So here's an example. This flyaway here, you can see it kind of removes it. And if you go max, it just goes crazy. But you always want to kind of tone it down a bit, because what it does is it hides the card effect. God, my PC just started making awful sounds. Okay. Noise tiling, it just adds a noise effect. I don't think you'll be able to see it on the stream, but I usually have it at about 20. Just gives it variation. Pixel depth offset uses the root, I think, and it basically allows you to make the roots a little bit more hidden, transparent. So if I just turn it up, you'll see it starts to kind of fade away. And if I just, you can see how the roots are very visible, like this. But if I just bump it up a little bit, just hides it ever so slightly. Now, obviously, I'm going through this very quickly, but this is kind of like you just spend like an hour just messing with the settings. Roughness, simple, very good. Roughness. I tend not to make it flat. I always go for a slight sheen, like that. Scattering is subsurface scattering. So this basically is how the light travels through the hair. So if it's off, it will treat the hair like it's a brick wall. Light, as you can see, is hitting it, but it's not going through, and it's like messing with the color. As you bring it up, you can see that the light kind of travels through the hair. And if you max it out, it's very bright. I tend to have this kind of 0.5, because if you have it too high up, it can remove the depth that you've spent all this time kind of making. So I have it about here. I think one of the key points of this is depth is one of the most important things. You want to see the light travel through the hair. For example, if I grab the lighting, where is it? There it is. So I've just hooked up some lights to a sphere, so I can control the sphere and it will just turn all the lights at once. See that the light just travels through it at different times, if that makes sense. So kind of see the light coming through, traveling through all the gaps. That's what makes it realistic, in my opinion. lighting back. So yeah, and these are basically all the settings you need. I don't really mess with tip power. I don't actually know what it does. Um, yeah, and if you wanted hair dye, for example, this is where the route map comes in. There we go. Is dyed. Turn that on. Unique hair value ID. Here's the dye mask. So I've got the dye mask set to ID. We probably actually want to. Oh, we'll put the route map in. And this is where it kind of is useful. So you can see with the route map, white at the tips, black at the roots. The dye isn't affecting the roots because it's black, and then as it comes in, it gets dyed. You can actually change live color you want. If you want a bit more dye, you need to go into kind of material editing kind of territory. But let's say we want just the hair completely pink. There you go. Just use the alpha map. Change the route. Go for a crazy combo. Green and pink, nice. Great. Yeah, that's that. And then if you want to turn it off, just press this button. Turn it off. Variation adds 2 new values here. So you always want to click that tick and then click the one next to it. These use the ID map, and you can basically add just a touch of variation. It is quite finicky. Right, yeah, okay. So that's basically the material. It's probably the best material you can find. I've tried making one myself, but it doesn't come close. So I send this back to black. While I'm here, actually no, I'll explain later. Yeah, that's the material. And again, it just uses the same 7 maps you've baked. I'll do LODs in a minute. So let's say you've just opened up Unreal Engine and you want to set up a scene. All you'd really need to do is, so as you can see, this is just a blank scene. No initial content or anything, it's just blank. I've made a cube with flipped normals, so it's just, when you're inside, everything's grey, except the roof, but everything's grey. This is a good like backdrop for renders sort of thing. And then you just throw in lights. So I'll show you some lights that I've used. If I turn off these lights, you can see that there's no global lights, there's no sun or anything. Let's say you want to bring in some lights, you want to light this thing up. There's some settings in lights that I never knew about, and it just makes the hair look a million times better. Let's throw this light in. Oh no, where did it go? Okay, so you can see this light, pretty bright. Oh, that looks good, to be fair, but it looks pretty bright. So I always reduce it, and then if we scroll down here to these settings, so specular scale, shadow bias. I never touched these before. I'd never even seen these before, but you can basically control everything, how it reacts. Okay, well, sometimes. And you can kind of mix it. So if I then do that, you can get a highlight on these cards. Oh, say we just wanted to get a little one over here. Reset these back to how they were. And now you've got two lights. One controls highlights, as you can see. One controls the rest of it. If I hide this one, for example, it just the highlights basically go. So if I just bump this up a bit, shadow resolution quite high. Oh, I think it's this section. Maybe you change the color. So yeah, you're already off to a good start. And you basically just want to follow the standard portrait lighting. So I always do 3-point lighting as a basic thing. When you're lighting in the industry, it's a little bit different to portfolio. With portfolio, you can kind of go crazy. You can have as many lights as you want. I kind of call these settings cheat settings, the settings that allow you to get highlights, because in engine you're not going to really get that. The best you'll probably get is one solid light, like a directional light. So when you're working in industry, you'll want to work with this type of light, because yeah, that's all you're going to really have in game. You'll never have a 3-point lighting setup following your character. So quickly show off the beard I did. This is a really good example of this lighting cheat sort of thing. This is a beard. Very nice beard. Yes, yes, yes. Lighting. Can't see all depth. And I basically cheated it because I used these other controls that you can just manipulate shadows and depth and stuff. Turn these off. I think it was this one, this light specifically. This is not the most organized scene. Yeah, so you can see every single strand has a shadow on it, which is ridiculous. You wouldn't get this with a standard light. And it just adds depth. So once again, these settings are just scroll down, it's under here. These are the standard settings just below. For rendering, there is a setting that I always turn on before I do a high resolution screenshot. So this is basically how I render, just high resolution screenshot, set it to 2. But this screen percentage is basically I want my hair looking really good button. So it usually begins at 100. So you can kind of see, yeah, it looks pretty good. It's a little bit difficult to see. Get these lights back on. A little bit difficult to see these flyaways. You know, you can see like pixels and stuff. Just bump this up. Ups the resolution. Lovely. Gorgeous, right? One final thing is HDRI. So this does nothing for lighting. This does absolutely nothing, but it just makes it look nice. Stick it in real world. It's just a sphere with a HDRI on it. Gives it a nice realistic look. I know I'm kind of throwing a hell of a lot of information, but yeah. I'll do one more example of hair, because I know dreadlocks are pretty tricky. This one. This is dreadlocks. Just, where is the lighting? This one? Yeah, okay. Dreadlocks, boom. Alright. Dreadlocks always look really confusing when you first get into basically making hair out of cards. So I'll try and explain it here. I don't have this split up like I do with the other hair, but I'll try and explain. So if you zoom in, you can actually see that this hair is just literally made of tubes with bumps in it. Ignoring the strays, it is just tubes, and it shows in the texture. So this tube actually, this tube is literally just this. This is just a long texture put on the tube. It's a bit noisy. I painted this in Substance using reference. But yeah, it is a tube. And after that, it is literally just flyaways. Like, you just go absolutely crazy. And as you can see, it works. Light bounces off it really nicely. You know, you got light coming in here. You can see it kind of bleed through. Get some of the lighting control. Where's the lighting control? There it is. And again, this doesn't use anything like ray tracing. It is just lighting and cards. So yeah. That is pretty much it. So yeah. One final thing I want to go through is LODs. Oh, so LODs, level of detail meshes. These basically, if you don't know what these are meshes made from the original hair that has been reduced in poly count. And what they're used for is when the camera moves further away from a character, for example, instead of having to render all these cards that you will never see, it switches to a lower density model. And there's about 4 stages to this, sometimes 5. And all it is the mesh with either cards removed or poly count reduced. And we always tend to go with a 50% reduction. So the first layer is the full final hair, commonly used in cinematics. You know, get really nice strays in, flyaway hairs. Commonly, kind of see at this distance, you start to lose the strands. So we tend to just remove the strands because you can barely see them. As you go further, you reduce geometry, remove all the flyaways. Even layer 4 you can get rid of. And then the final stage, you just reduce as much as possible. So that's LODs. And you'll be doing a lot of those because, well, actually, Unreal Engine kind of have gotten around that, but people still use LODs, basically. I quickly wanted to just go over kind of my experiences in the different fields or the different company styles. The freelance, I've been doing. Oh, I put that as freelance. That's not freelance. I put it twice. The top one's supposed to say outsourcing. So, at an outsourcing company, for example, you get to work on so many projects. When I first joined the industry, I was at an outsourcing company, and one of my dream games to work on is Forza, and I managed to get that basically day one. And you work on so many projects that get released. It's really a great experience, and there's so many different techniques, different engines require different textures, different card placements, all sorts. So you learn a hell of a lot, but you have to be very fast because clients usually come to outsourcing companies when there's a deadline to hit or, that sort of thing. I would say outsourcing is great for beginners, although there is a high chance, or not high chance, but there's a chance of burnout just because it's such a quick, fast pace kind of scene. So working directly with a company, so yeah, you've been hired to work with Playground Games or something. You have a lot of control when it comes to style and development, so you can just get up, walk to the art director, or be like, oh, I have this idea, and you have a lot of, I wouldn't say control, but it's a lot easier. A lot of direct communication, and you have a better chance of learning from others because it's much slower. You can take your time. Freelance, I'm doing freelance right now. It's quite a wild experience because as a freelance, you're kind of considered, hey, you know what you're doing, do this. So gives you a lot of pride in your work, I guess. It is a tougher ride. You need to have a lot of experience and just be confident with what you can do. I wouldn't say it's a beginner sort of thing. And you have a lot of independence in your work. You would consider it your work, if that makes sense. That was a lot of info. I've got some resources. So the first one is presentation lighting and creation of the sorcerer's character. This is a marmoset kind of tutorial. Very basic, but it has everything you need, including it talks about the textures, the different shaders, the volume. It talks about everything. It is made for marmoset rendering, but all the techniques are pretty much universal. So this is a stunning breakdown of hair. So this, can I open this? Oh yeah, I can. So this is by Howl. He's a good friend of mine. He is probably one of the best hair artists I know. And this breakdown is basically everything I've just said, but he does it way better. So I recommend you look at this. Goes through pretty much everything. He's great. Oh, I just lost my spot. Oh no, here we go. GS Curve tools. The tools I use to play cards. This guy made it. He has a YouTube, and it's an incredible tutorial. He has a huge set of videos talking about the tool, and he also has a big document for everything. And finally, the Photoshop tutorials. So CG Pal is another channel. I think they made Photoshop, and they basically go through the whole tutorial.